And explosive divorce spirals into chaos when, before cameras and witnesses, a pregnant woman is pushed down a staircase by her ex-husband's new lover. The video goes viral, the nation is outraged, and the search for justice transforms into a war against manipulation, power, and fear. But when she finds strength in her own voice, the fall that almost destroyed her becomes the beginning of her rise. If you enjoy stories like this, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment saying where you're listening from. On a muggy Tuesday morning at the Miami Central Courthouse in Florida, what should have been just another divorce hearing turned into a chaotic spectacle that gripped the heart of Florida's justice system. Laura Anderson, 32, 7 months pregnant and wearing a discreet navy blue dress, walked down the main corridor of the second floor. Her posture was dignified, despite the tired gaze and dark circles under her eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. She wasn't there by choice, but by necessity. The divorce proceedings against her ex-husband, Edward Miller, a prominent real estate developer in the city, had dragged on for almost a year. Her presence in court was unwelcome by many, especially by Deborah Carter, Edward's current partner. At 35, Deborah was known in certain social circles of the city as someone who got what she wanted no matter the cost. That morning, she had chosen a blood-red dress that contrasted dramatically with the sober attire typical of a courthouse environment. "Laura, are you still insisting on this?" Edward's voice echoed down the hallway. Elegant in his Italian suit, he maintained the same rehearsed smile he used in business magazine photos. "We can resolve everything without this circus." Before Laura could respond, William Anderson, her older brother and a renowned federal prosecutor, stepped between them. William's presence in the case was something Edward had not anticipated. After years working in Washington, D.C., he had returned to Miami specifically to support his sister in this legal battle. "Edward, all communication must go through the attorneys." "You know that," William replied, his voice calm but firm. Deborah, who until then had been observing the scene with an almost imperceptible smile, approached Edward, intertwining her arm with his. Her eyes never left William's, and there was something in that gaze that few would notice. A past intimacy, a silent recognition that brought untold stories to the surface. "William Anderson," she said, pronouncing each syllable as if savoring the name. "It's been a long time. I didn't expect to see you defending such domestic causes." The comment hit William like a precise arrow. There was history there, one that Laura was completely unaware of. Years ago, before Deborah got involved with Edward, she and William had an intense secret relationship that ended turbulently. He never told his sister about this dark chapter of his life, and now the consequences of that silence were about to manifest in the worst possible way. The corridors began to fill with lawyers, staff, and others awaiting their respective hearings. The tension between the four was palpable, weighing down the already heavy air of the courthouse. Laura adjusted her bag on her shoulder and made a move to head for the courtroom when she felt a sharp pain in her belly. The baby, as if sensing its mother's anguish, moved restlessly. "Let's go in," William suggested, noticing his sister's discomfort. Judge Dr. Teresa Campbell is known for her punctuality. Edward and Deborah followed a few steps behind. As they walked towards the central staircase, the elevator was out of order. Deborah whispered something in Edward's ear that made him frown. The man looked at Laura with an expression that mixed concern and guilt, but remained silent. The imposing marble staircase of the Miami courthouse, with its wide steps and ornate railing, was considered a remarkable architectural work. At that moment, however, it represented a challenge for Laura in her advanced state of pregnancy. William offered his arm for support as they descended carefully. Deborah watched the scene with a look that oscillated between disdain and contained fury. For her, Laura was the last obstacle to be removed. It wasn't enough to have conquered Edward. She wanted to erase any trace of his past, especially the one growing in his ex-wife's womb. And there was something deeper fueling her hostility. Every time she looked at William, she was reminded of how she had been rejected years ago, how he had made her feel inadequate, inferior, unworthy of her social and professional position. The moment happened with terrifying speed. When Laura and William were almost halfway down the staircase, Deborah quickened her pace, overtaking Edward. With a movement that would appear accidental to inattentive eyes, but calculated in its precision, she bumped into Laura with enough force to unbalance her. Time seemed to freeze. Laura felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, her arms instinctively wrapped around her belly to protect the baby as her body began the inevitable fall down the marble staircase. Horrified screams echoed through the lobby. Edward stood paralyzed, his eyes wide in genuine shock. It was William who reacted with the speed the situation demanded. In an almost superhuman movement, driven by desperation, he managed to grab his sister's wrist and pull her back, preventing her head from hitting the hard steps. The impact of the movement caused both of them to fall to a seated position, but Laura was safe, protected by her brother's body. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the frantic clicks of cell phones capturing the moment and the sound of hurried footsteps of security guards rushing towards the commotion. Deborah remained at the top of the stairs, an expression of false concern quickly replacing the brief flash of satisfaction that had crossed her face. "My God, it was an accident. She lost her balance. I was just passing by." But her performance found few convinced spectators. Two interns from the district attorney's office, who witnessed the scene from a privileged angle, were already whispering to each other, pointing at Deborah with expressions of indignation. And even more revealing, the blinking red light of the security camera in the corner of the ceiling indicated that everything had been recorded. "Someone call an ambulance!" William's voice boomed through the lobby as he helped Laura sit on a nearby bench. His normally composed face now showed a mixture of concern and controlled fury. "And someone preserve that security footage. Now!" A courthouse security guard, recognizing the federal prosecutor, nodded and immediately spoke into his radio. Edward finally emerged from his state of shock and approached Laura, but was stopped by William's sharp gaze. "Stay away from her," the prosecutor ordered. "Both of you, stay away." Laura, still trembling, was breathing with difficulty. Her hands remained on her belly, and silent tears streamed down her face. "The baby? William, the baby?" "It's going to be okay," he assured her, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. As paramedics arrived and began to attend to Laura, William looked up, directly into Deborah's eyes. In that moment, something passed between them, a mutual recognition of what was truly happening. This wasn't just about Laura, Edward, or the baby. There was an older, more complex story behind that aggression, one William had tried to forget for years. Within minutes, the courthouse transformed into an ordered chaos. Journalists covering other cases were already crowding the lobby, drawn by the commotion. The news began to spread. Real estate developer involved in incident at Central Courthouse, pregnant ex-wife pushed by current partner. Laura was carefully placed on a stretcher. Before being taken to the ambulance, she grabbed her brother's hand. "Don't let them get away with this, Will, please." "I promise," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. As the ambulance departed with sirens blaring, the courthouse buzzed with whispers. Edward tried to control Deborah, who alternated between false displays of concern and vehement defenses of her innocence to anyone willing to listen. "It was an accident. Anyone can see it was an accident," her voice echoed, but her eyes revealed the panic of someone beginning to realize the consequences of their actions. William remained in the lobby, observing the scene with an analytical gaze that contrasted with the emotional storm raging within him. He knew Deborah better than she imagined. He knew what she was capable of when she felt threatened or challenged. What he didn't immediately understand was why Laura had become the target of this rage. The answer came in the form of a text message that flashed on his phone screen, sent from an unknown number. "She found out about us and she thinks you came back because of your sister. Be careful." William felt a shiver run down his spine. The past he had tried to bury was resurfacing in the worst possible way, intertwining dangerously with the present. He didn't know who sent the message, but he had a strong suspicion. What he didn't know yet was how deep the secrets were that were about to come to light. Secrets that could destroy not only Deborah and Edward's reputation, but also his own. As he put his phone away, he noticed a woman watching him from across the lobby. Danielle Peterson, an investigative reporter for the Miami Herald, famous for unearthing scandals involving powerful figures in the region. Her eyes shone with the intensity of someone who had just found her next big story. The staircase of the Miami Central Courthouse, which moments before was just another architectural element of the building, had now transformed into ground zero for a drama that promised to involve some of the city's most influential families. And for William, it was clear that this was just the first act of a story far more complex than anyone could imagine. The cold, aseptic corridors of St. Elizabeth's Hospital one of Miami's most prestigious, became the new battlefield. William Anderson hurried down the fifth-floor corridor, where Laura was admitted for observation. The last 24 hours had been a whirlwind. Thanks to rapid medical intervention, both she and the baby were out of danger, but the emotional impact of the incident was far from over. On his way to room 507, William was intercepted by Dr. Claudia Monroe, the obstetrician in charge of the case. "Mr. Anderson, we need to talk," she said, guiding him to a small meeting room. Her face showed the seriousness typical of doctors when they need to deliver delicate news. "Your sister is physically well considering the circumstances, but I'm concerned about her emotional state. She refuses to talk about the incident, and we had to administer a mild sedative to help her sleep." William nodded, feeling the weight of guilt growing on his shoulders. If he had told Laura about his past relationship with Deborah, perhaps she would have been more prepared, more alert. "There's one more thing," the doctor continued hesitantly. "We found a note in her room this morning. The nurse saw it first and alerted me." She handed William a folded piece of paper. The message, written in letters cut from magazines, like in the most cliched suspense films, read, "This was just the beginning. Stay away from the case, or the next accident will be final." William's blood ran cold. "Do you have security cameras in the corridors?" "Yes, I've already requested the overnight footage. Security has been reinforced, and no one enters her room without identification." Meanwhile, across town, Edward Miller's luxurious apartment in the South Beach neighborhood was simmering with tension. In the spacious living room overlooking the sea, Deborah paced back and forth, smoking compulsively, a habit she had sworn to quit. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Edward roared, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and fear. "There are cameras all over that courthouse. What if she had—" He swallowed hard, unable to complete the sentence. "What if she had what, Edward?" Deborah stopped abruptly, staring at him. "Suffered more, isn't that what you wanted? To get rid of her once and for all?" "I never said that. I wanted the divorce, not—" He ran a hand through his hair in despair. "My God, Deborah, she's pregnant with my child." Deborah laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the room. "Your child? That child is your anchor, Edward. It's the last control she has over you, over us." She approached, softening her expression. "Don't you realize that as long as she has that baby, you'll never be completely free?" Edward sank heavily onto the sofa, his face buried in his hands. Something about Deborah's calculated coldness scared him now, as if he were seeing a facet of her for the first time, or perhaps it had always been there and he had simply chosen not to see it. "We need a lawyer," he murmured. "A good one." "I've already taken care of it," Deborah replied, her tone surprisingly calm. "I called Arthur Morrison." Edward looked up, shocked. "Morrison? He defends corrupt politicians and businessmen involved in scandals. Hiring him is practically admitting guilt." "He's the best, Edward. And right now we need the best." She extinguished her cigarette and picked up her phone. "Besides, he has connections with the judge who will take the case." The expression on Edward's face subtly changed, the astute businessman regaining control over the worried husband. "What kind of connections?" Deborah's smile was her only answer. In the newsroom of the Miami Herald, Danielle Peterson worked frantically, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she finished the main article for the next day's edition. The incident at the courthouse was pure gold for an investigative journalist. "Developer Edward Miller embroiled in scandal at Central Courthouse," she read the headline aloud, satisfied. The photos she had obtained perfectly captured the drama. Laura being rescued, William confronting Deborah, the chaos in the lobby. George Thompson, the editor-in-chief, stopped beside her desk. "Good job, Danny. But are we sure about this angle? Did witnesses confirm it was intentional?" Danielle spun in her chair to face him. "3 independent witnesses and the security camera. It's definitive." "And what do we know about this Deborah Carter? She doesn't sound unfamiliar." A gleam of excitement passed through the reporter's eyes. "That's the trick, George. I did a quick search and found something interesting." She opened a folder on her computer. 5 years ago, Deborah worked as a legal assistant at the firm where William Anderson was a partner, before he went to the federal prosecutor's office. There are rumors they had a relationship. George whistled softly. "So the victim's brother had an affair with the aggressor. That's explosive," Danielle completed. "And there's more. Sources close to the couple say Edward is involved in an overbilling scheme in contracts with the city for the construction of affordable housing." The same project William Anderson was investigating before taking leave to return to Miami. Are you sure you want to go down this road, Danny? Messing with Edward Miller is no joke. He has powerful friends. Daniela closed her laptop with a determined snap. That's exactly why we need to dig deep into this story, George. No one is above the law, not even the mayor's friends. The editor sighed, recognizing that stubborn expression. Just be careful and make sure everything is impeccably verified before we publish any direct accusations. Back at the hospital, William finally entered the room where Laura was resting. Her face still showed signs of shock and exhaustion, but there was a determined glint in her eyes that surprised him. "How are you feeling?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Like someone who was almost pushed down the stairs," she replied with a sarcasm that didn't match her usual sweetness. "The baby is fine, thanks to you." William held her hand, gathering courage for the conversation he could no longer postpone. "Laura, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." She watched him intently, as if she already knew what was coming next. "It's about you and Deborah, isn't it?" The shock on his face was evident. "How?" "Edward let something slip a few months ago when we were still trying to reconcile. He said I wasn't the first Anderson to be abandoned by someone she loved." Laura adjusted herself in bed, a pang of pain crossing her face. "I thought it was just a malicious provocation, but after what happened yesterday, the way you two looked at each other..." William sighed deeply. "It was 5 years ago. She worked at the firm as a legal assistant, just starting her career. We had an intense but secret relationship. No one knew, not even you. Why the secret? The firm had strict policies against relationships between superiors and subordinates, and honestly, I was in the process of divorcing Patricia. I didn't want any more scandals." Laura shook her head, connecting the dots. "And how did it end?" "Badly," William admitted, reliving painful memories. "Deborah was unstable, possessive. When I realized the relationship was becoming toxic, I tried to end it amicably. She didn't take it well." "What did she do?" "She threatened to expose our relationship, to destroy my reputation. She said I was discarding her for being socially inferior." He paused, his face shadowed by guilt. "In the end, I offered to help her get a better job at another firm in exchange for discretion. She accepted, but she never forgave me. I thought it was all in the past until yesterday." A heavy silence hung between the siblings, broken only by the constant beep of the heart monitor. "She pushed you to get to me," William concluded, his voice choked with guilt. "That makes it all my responsibility." "No." Laura squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "She pushed me because she's a dangerous person who doesn't care about hurting others to get what she wants. And Edward is just as guilty as she is for allowing this to happen." At that moment, a nurse entered the room. "Excuse me, Mr. Anderson, there's someone wanting to speak with you. Says it's urgent." William frowned, following the nurse into the corridor. To his surprise, he found a middle-aged man, discreetly dressed with a nervous expression. "Mr. Anderson, my name is Robert Smith. I'm a security guard at the condominium where Mr. Edward Miller lives. What can I do for you?" The man looked around, visibly uncomfortable. "Last night I overheard a conversation between him and Miss Carter. They were discussing about permanently silencing your sister." He swallowed hard. "Not just in court, if you understand me." William's blood ran cold. "Do you have proof of this?" Robert nodded slowly, pulling a small recorder from his pocket. "I do rounds in the building. The apartments have nearby balconies, and they were talking loudly." He hesitated. "Mr. Anderson, I have a family. I need this job, but what I heard isn't right. And if something happens to your sister and I do nothing..." William watched the man with a mixture of gratitude and caution. It could be a trap, but his intuition told him the guard's concern was genuine. "I appreciate your courage, Mr. Smith. I promise your name will remain confidential. Could you meet me later to make a formal statement?" Meanwhile, downtown, Arthur Morrison, Florida's most feared criminal defense attorney, entered his office to find Edward and Deborah already waiting for him. At 65, Morrison had a reputation for never losing a case, no matter how guilty his client. "So," he began, adjusting his thin-framed glasses, "I hear we have a little staircase problem." Edward began to explain, but Deborah interrupted him. "It was an accident, obviously, but her family is trying to turn this into something criminal." Morrison observed her with the coldness of someone who had seen all types of clients. "Miss Carter, let's establish a basic rule. Never lie to your lawyer. Save the stories for the judge and the press. The silence that followed was revealing. Now, he continued, what really happened on that staircase? While Edward and Deborah told their version to the lawyer, Danielle Peterson parked her car in front of the hospital. With luck, she would get an exclusive interview with Laura, or even better, with William Anderson, the man who could be the key to unraveling not only the staircase incident, but also a possible corruption scheme that extended from the real estate sector to the mayor's office. What none of those involved realized was that amidst the chaos, an ancient Pandora's box was being opened, and the secrets that emerged from it could forever change everyone's destiny. Miami, known for its waterways, bridges, and rich history, would now be the stage for a battle where past and present would dangerously intertwine. A city where, behind the historic facades and modern skyscrapers, truths as turbulent as the surrounding waters lay hidden. The front page of the Miami Herald the next morning displayed a headline that made the entire city stop to read, "Courthouse Scandal, Developer and Partner Accused of Premeditated Assault." Below, a photo of Laura being rescued dramatically contrasted with an image of Deborah at the top of the staircase, her red dress creating symbolism that did not go unnoticed by readers. At St. Elizabeth's Hospital, the newspaper passed from hand to hand among staff until it reached room 507, where Laura received it with a mixture of horror and validation. Finally, someone was exposing the truth. But her satisfaction was short-lived. On page 3, a secondary column questioned the coincidence of William Anderson's return to Miami, just as an investigation into real estate contracts was underway. Veiled insinuations suggested that the courthouse incident might have been orchestrated to divert attention from alleged irregularities in the federal prosecutor's career. "This is absurd," exclaimed William, who read over his sister's shoulder. "They're trying to invert the situation, turn us into villains." "It's just the beginning," Laura replied with surprising calm. Her days in the hospital had transformed her demeanor. The initial fear was giving way to a silent determination William had never seen in his sister before. "Edward has contacts in the press. He always has." A light tap on the door interrupted their conversation. Teresa Morris, a hospital social worker, entered carrying a small wooden box. "Good morning, Miss Anderson. Your neighbor brought this last night. Said you had asked for some personal items." Laura immediately recognized the keepsake box she kept on her dressing table. She thanked her, waiting for Teresa to leave before opening it. Inside, among old photos and small mementos, she found what she was looking for. A letter yellowed with time, written in the firm hand of her mother, Mrs. Celeste, who had passed away 3 years prior. "What is that?" William asked, noticing the tears beginning to form in his sister's eyes. "Mom wrote this letter when she had her first cancer treatment, remember? She gave one to each of us, to read in difficult times." Laura carefully opened the envelope, as one would handle a sacred relic. "I never needed to open it. Until now." Mrs. Celeste's elegant handwriting filled 2 pages with words of wisdom and encouragement. William watched his sister read in silence, her face gradually transforming. When she reached the end, Laura took a deep breath and read the last paragraph aloud. "My daughter, throughout life, I have learned that silence rarely protects those who keep it. It may seem a safe refuge, but it is a prison without visible doors. Even when your voice trembles, scream, because the fear of what they might say about you is always less than the strength that is born when you decide to speak your truth. I love you eternally, Mom." A reverent silence filled the room. William recognized in his mother's words the same strength he had always admired in her. A woman who had raised 2 children alone after being abandoned by her husband, who had faced prejudice and hardship without ever losing her dignity. "She always knew what to say, didn't she?" he murmured, feeling a pang of longing. Laura carefully folded the letter. "I think it's time to follow her advice. I won't be silent anymore." At that very moment, in Arthur Morrison's luxurious office, a strategic meeting was taking place. The veteran lawyer analyzed the news while Edward and Deborah waited tensely. "The article in the Herald partially worked," Morrison observed. "Casting doubt on William Anderson was clever, but we need more." "How about emphasizing Laura's emotional state?" suggested Deborah, her fingers nervously tapping on the mahogany table. "Everyone knows pregnant women are emotionally unstable. We can say she was agitated, that I just tried to calm her down, and she lost her balance." Edward looked at her with growing discomfort. Each new suggestion from Deborah revealed a manipulative facet he had preferred to ignore during their relationship. "We can try that angle," Morrison agreed, making notes. "But the biggest problem remains the security camera footage. We need to prevent it from being used as evidence." "How would we do that?" Edward asked. Morrison's smile was calculatedly reassuring. "Leave that to me. I have contacts at the courthouse who can help to, let's say, ensure that recording suffers an unfortunate technical issue." In the Miami Herald newsroom, Danielle Peterson faced her own set of problems. Called into George Thompson's office, she found the editor visibly disturbed. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting in the indicated chair. "I received 3 calls this morning, one from the mayor's office, another from the paper's largest advertiser, and the third from our legal department." George took off his glasses, massaging his temples. All with the same message: stop investigating Edward Miller. Danielle felt her blood boil. "Then we're on the right track. If they're so desperate to silence us, there must be something big hidden." "Danny, you don't understand. They threatened to sue the paper for defamation. They talked about canceling multi-million-dollar advertising contracts. And you're going to back down?" The disappointment in her voice was palpable. George put his glasses back on, regaining some of his composure. "I didn't say that. I said we need to be much more careful. No accusations without concrete evidence. No insinuations about his involvement in corruption schemes without solid documentation." Relieved by the response, Danielle nodded. "I can work with those restrictions. In fact, I have a source who might be able to provide us with exactly the kind of proof we need." "Who?" "A security guard from Miller's condominium. Apparently he recorded a rather compromising conversation between Edward and Deborah." George raised his eyebrows. "Would a recording obtained that way be admissible in court?" "Maybe not, but in the court of public opinion?" Danielle smiled. "Absolutely devastating." Later that afternoon, William met Robert Smith, the security guard, at a discreet cafe in the downtown Miami neighborhood. The man seemed even more nervous than at the hospital, constantly looking over his shoulder. "They found out," Robert said in a low voice, as soon as William sat down. "I don't know how, but they found out I spoke to you. I was suspended from work this morning, supposedly for violating residents' privacy." William felt a knot in his stomach. "I'm sorry. I didn't imagine they'd react so quickly." "The problem isn't just the job." Robert leaned closer. "I received a visit last night. 2 men I've never seen before, saying I should forget what I heard if I wanted my family to be safe." William's expression hardened. "That's witness intimidation. I can guarantee protection for you and your family if you file a formal complaint." Robert shook his head, fear evident in his eyes. "I can't risk it, Mr. Anderson. I have 2 young daughters." He discreetly slid a USB drive across the table. "But I also can't stand by while they try to hurt a pregnant woman. Here's the original recording. What you do with it, that's your problem." Before William could properly thank him, Robert stood up and left quickly, leaving him alone with the small device that could change everything. That night, the local news opened with exclusive images that quickly spread to national channels. The courthouse security camera footage, clearly showing Deborah pushing Laura down the staircase. Somehow the video had been leaked to the press. In Edward's apartment, chaos ensued. Deborah screamed into the phone at Arthur Morrison, demanding to know how this could have happened. "You said you'd take care of it, that you had contacts." "And I do," Morrison replied, his usual calm shaken. "Someone outmaneuvered us. The copy that was supposed to be erased had already been duplicated. We're dealing with a smarter adversary than we imagined." Edward, sitting on the sofa with a glass of whiskey in his hand, watched Deborah with a distant gaze. "It's over," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "All the years of work. My reputation. It's all over." "Don't be dramatic," Deborah retorted, hanging up the phone angrily. "This is just a setback. Morrison can still argue the video was edited, that it doesn't show the full context." Edward laughed bitterly. "You really don't understand the gravity of the situation, do you? It's not just about the courthouse video. If they start digging deeper, they'll find other things. Things we can't explain." Deborah's gaze hardened. "What things exactly?" Edward hesitated, realizing too late that he had said more than he should have. "Nothing specific. I'm just worried." But Deborah was not easily deceived. Approaching him with the intensity of a predator cornering its prey, she asked, "What have you been hiding from me, Edward? I thought we had no secrets." The developer looked away, but the damage was done. A new tension settled between them. Distrust, the seed of chaos that was about to blossom. Back at the hospital, a small celebration was taking place in Laura's room. Dr. Claudia had just delivered the news that mother and baby were well enough for discharge the next day. "But I want you to promise absolute rest for at least 2 weeks," the doctor warned. "No stress, no court, no confrontations." Laura nodded. Though everyone in the room knew that promise would be difficult to keep, the case had grown too large, with implications that went far beyond a complicated divorce. When the doctor left, William sat beside his sister. "I have news," he said in a low voice, "good and bad." "Start with the bad," Laura replied, adjusting herself in bed. "The source who gave us the recording is being threatened, and Edward seems to have even darker secrets that could complicate everything. And the good." William smiled slightly. Danielle Peterson, the reporter from the Herald, obtained statements from 3 eyewitnesses to the incident. All confirm that Deborah acted intentionally. And, he paused dramatically, she discovered that Arthur Morrison tried to access the courthouse security system to erase the recordings. Laura absorbed the information in silence. After a moment, she asked, "What happens now?" "Now?" William sighed deeply. "Now the real battle begins. They will try to discredit the evidence, discredit you, discredit me. They will play dirty, Laura. You need to be prepared." She touched her belly protectively, feeling the baby stir as if responding to her concerns. Then, with surprising determination, she said, "I'm tired of being afraid, Will. For years I lived in Edward's shadow, believing I needed him to be complete. Then I lived in the shadow of fear of what he might do. No more." Picking up her mother's letter again, she reread the phrase that had become her mantra, "Even when your voice trembles, scream." "I'm ready to scream," she declared, looking directly into her brother's eyes. "For myself, for my son, and for all the other women who have been silenced." What Laura didn't know was that, as she spoke those words, Deborah was ransacking Edward's office in search of the secrets he had mentioned. And what she found, documents hidden in a secret compartment inside a false book, could completely change the course of the story. Papers that not only implicated Edward, but also important political figures in the city, and surprisingly, connected directly to an investigation William had conducted years ago. The truth, like a long-dammed river, was about to break its barriers. And when it did, no one in Miami would be prepared for the force of its current. Courtroom 5 of the Miami-Dade County Courthouse was packed that Thursday morning. Journalists, curious onlookers, and important figures from Miami society vied for the best seats to witness what was already considered the most publicized trial of the year. In the center of that whirlwind, Laura Anderson entered with her head held high, led by William and her attorney, Dr. Helen Campbell, a renowned expert in criminal law. 2 weeks had passed since the staircase incident, 2 weeks of revelations, threats, and an intense media battle. Public opinion, initially divided, now leaned heavily in Laura's favor, especially after the leaked recording of a conversation where Deborah and Edward discussed ways to permanently silence her. On the other side of the room, Edward and Deborah occupied separate seats, a clear indication of the cracks in their relationship. Arthur Morrison, sitting between them, maintained his usual impassive expression, but the slight tremor in his hands as he organized documents revealed his concern. Judge Dr. Victoria Sampson, known for her rigidity and impartiality, entered the room, immediately silencing everyone present. "Before we begin," she announced after the initial formalities, "I would like to make it clear that I will not tolerate any attempt to turn this courtroom into a media circus. Evidence will be evaluated with due rigor, and decisions made strictly based on the law." Her stern gaze swept the room, pausing momentarily on Morrison, as if she knew of the lawyer's attempts to influence the case behind the scenes. The trial began with the prosecution's presentation of evidence. Dr. Helen Campbell was direct, displaying the security camera video on a large screen for all to see. The images were unquestionable. Deborah clearly pushed Laura, and her face showed a brief moment of satisfaction before changing to false concern. Next, 3 witnesses confirmed what the images showed: a law student interning at the courthouse, a judicial secretary, and an independent lawyer, All described the scene similarly, leaving no room for alternative interpretations. When it was the defense's turn, Arthur Morrison attempted his planned strategy, questioning Laura's emotional stability, suggesting she provoked Deborah, insinuating the video had been manipulated. But each argument seemed fragile in the face of the solid evidence presented by the prosecution. The decisive moment came when Laura was called to testify. Dressed simply, but with a dignity that impressed even her opponents, she walked to the witness chair. Her pregnancy, now 8 months along, was even more visible, creating a dramatic contrast with the situation. "Ms. Anderson," Judge Sampson began, "please describe in your own words what happened that day at the courthouse." Laura took a deep breath, her eyes momentarily meeting Williams, who nodded encouragingly. "Your Honor, that day I was at the courthouse for a divorce hearing. I was nervous, of course, but determined to move forward with my life. When I encountered Edward and Deborah in the corridor, I tried to maintain my composure to avoid conflict. But as we descended the staircase, I felt a violent shove in my back. It was not an accidental bump. It was deliberate, with enough force to knock me down." Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued, recalling her mother's advice. "If it weren't for my brother's quick reaction, my baby and I could have suffered serious, perhaps irreversible injuries. What disturbs me most is not just the act itself, but the premeditation, the planning that came afterward to try to cover everything up." Arthur Morrison rose for cross-examination, his tone falsely compassionate. "Ms. Anderson, I understand this is a difficult situation for you. But isn't it true that in the months leading up to the incident, you displayed erratic behavior, including making unfounded accusations against Mr. Miller?" Laura looked him directly in the eye. "Define erratic behavior, Dr. Morrison. Would it be erratic to question my ex-husband's infidelities? Would it be erratic to ask for transparency about our joint finances when I discovered suspicious movements? Or perhaps it's erratic for a pregnant woman to want to secure her rights and her child's safety?" A murmur of approval swept through the room, quickly silenced by the judge. Morrison, visibly uncomfortable, changed tactics. "Are you aware of the past relationship between your brother, Prosecutor William Anderson, and Ms. Deborah Carter?" "Yes, I am," Laura replied without hesitation. "A relationship that ended years ago, long before Deborah met Edward, a relationship she apparently never got over, turning resentment into an obsession that culminated in the assault against me." The lawyer, realizing he had lost control of the interrogation, attempted one last blow. "Are you and your brother not using this incident to divert attention from an investigation into real estate contracts that could implicate Mr. Miller?" Before Laura could answer, Dr. Helen Campbell rose energetically. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculative and irrelevant to the case at hand." "Objection sustained," the judge agreed. "Dr. Morrison, stick to the scope of this specific case." When Deborah was called to testify, the transformation was remarkable. The vibrant red dress had given way to a sober pastel-toned ensemble. The heavy makeup was replaced by an almost natural appearance. Even her posture had changed, from arrogant to seemingly remorseful. "Ms. Carter," Judge Sampson began, "please explain your version of events." Deborah cast a quick glance at Morrison before starting in a trembling voice. "It was a terrible accident, Your Honor. I was rushing past to catch up with Edward when I accidentally bumped into Laura. I never intended to hurt her." "The security footage shows something different," the judge observed. "The cameras only capture a moment, an angle," Deborah argued, her tears seeming too calculated to be genuine. "They don't show my desperation afterward, my concern." Dr. Helen Campbell's interrogation was relentless. "Ms. Carter, you claim it was an accident. Then why, hours after the incident, were you recorded discussing with Mr. Miller ways to permanently silence Ms. Anderson?" A shocked silence swept through the room. This evidence had not been previously disclosed. Deborah visibly paled. I don't know what you're talking about." Helen motioned, and a court officer handed an envelope to the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to present the recording obtained by Robert Smith, a security guard at the condominium where the couple resides. The quality is not perfect, but the voices are clearly identifiable." The judge examined the document accompanying the recording and nodded. "Proceed." The audio filled the room, Edward and Deborah heatedly discussing how to prevent Laura from testifying, with incriminating phrases like, "She needs to be silenced," and "If she talks, we're ruined." When the audio ended, Deborah looked completely different from the fragile woman who had begun her testimony. Her eyes burned with barely contained anger, and when she spoke, her voice had lost all its false sweetness. "This recording was obtained illegally. It's inadmissible." "I am still evaluating its admissibility as formal evidence," the judge calmly replied, "but your reaction seems to confirm its authenticity." The tension in the room was palpable when Edward was called. Unlike Deborah, he seemed defeated before he even began. He answered questions mechanically, denying direct involvement in the staircase incident, but unable to satisfactorily explain the recorded conversation. When the prosecution presented documents showing suspicious financial transfers to an account associated with Arthur Morrison, transfers made the day after the incident, coinciding with the attempt to access the courthouse security system, Edward's face lost all color. "Mr. Miller," Dr. Helen asked, "did you attempt to bribe court officials to destroy evidence?" Edward looked at Morrison, then at Deborah, and finally at Laura. Something in his gaze shifted, a mixture of shame and resignation. "Not personally," he finally replied, "but I authorized it to be done." The admission sent shockwaves through the room. Morrison stood up abruptly, trying to interrupt, but it was too late. "Deborah said it was the only way out," Edward continued, ignoring his lawyer's frantic gestures. "She said we needed to protect our interests at all costs." "And what exactly would those interests be, Mr. Miller?" Helen pressed. "Something beyond this specific case." Edward hesitated, then looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to speak with another lawyer. I believe Dr. Morrison has a conflict of interest in this case." The room erupted in murmurs. The judge ordered a 1-hour recess, during which Edward requested a deal with the prosecution in exchange for information about a larger scheme involving inflated contracts, kickbacks, and a network of corruption that extended to the mayor's office. When the session resumed, the judge announced, "After evaluating all the evidence presented, this court is ready to deliver a verdict in the case of assault against Laura Anderson." The verdict was clear. Deborah Carter was found guilty of aggravated assault and attempted obstruction of justice, sentenced to 6 years of incarceration. Edward Miller, in agreement with the prosecution, received a reduced sentence of 4 years for complicity and obstruction of justice in exchange for his cooperation with broader corruption investigations. Arthur Morrison, caught by surprise by the turn of events, became the target of an investigation by the State Bar Association for unethical conduct and possible bribery. When the session ended, Laura was surrounded by reporters in the courthouse lobby. Danielle Peterson from the Miami Herald managed the final question. "Ms. Anderson, what do you feel now that justice has been served?" Laura thought for a moment before replying, "I don't see this as an end, but as a beginning for me, for my son, and I hope for other women who face similar situations. The truth doesn't always protect immediately, but it illuminates. And where there is light, shadows cannot dominate." 3 months later, the Celeste Anderson Support Center, named in honor of Laura's mother, opened its doors in the Brickell neighborhood, an initiative dedicated to offering legal, psychological, and social support to women victims of domestic violence and emotional abuse. On opening day, with her newborn son Peter in her arms, Laura cut the symbolic ribbon alongside William. Among those present were Robert Smith and his family, now protected by a special program and with a new job; Danielle Peterson, whose series of reports on the case had won a National Journalism Award; and dozens of women inspired to seek help after following her story. "This center was born from pain," Laura said in her opening speech, "but its purpose is healing. May every woman who walks through these doors find not only practical help, but the courage to make her voice heard, even when it trembles." William, watching his sister with admiration, thought about how the most difficult circumstances often reveal unexpected strength in people. The same Laura who once lived in her husband's shadow had now become a beacon for other women. In the center's main office, a discreet plaque displayed the phrase that had changed everything. "Even when your voice trembles, scream, because silence does not protect." And across town at the Miami Women's Correctional Facility, Deborah Carter stared at the walls of her cell, her red dress exchanged for the standard inmate uniform. In her hands, a letter whose sender had surprised her. Laura. It contained no accusations or bitterness, just a simple message. Forgiveness is not for you, it is for me. I hope that one day you find peace with your past, as I have found with mine. On the courthouse steps, now empty of the media frenzy, Laura and William paused for a moment before heading home. Those marble steps, which had almost been the scene of a tragedy, now symbolized not a fall but an ascent. A woman who almost fell but who rose, and in doing so rose stronger than she had ever imagined possible. "Ready?" William asked, offering his arm to his sister as little Peter slept peacefully in his stroller. Laura looked one last time at the staircase, then at her son, and finally at the Miami skyline, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of hope. "Ready?" she replied, her voice firm and without tremor, and together they left the past behind one step at a time.